the unheard echoes of Willow Creek. For 30 years, a town's silence hid a terrible secret. But what they missed wasn't what they could see, it was what they couldn't hear. Alastair Finch existed in a self-imposed purgatory of dust and regret, a landscape defined by the brittle, yellowing pages of the Willow Creek disappearances. Retirement had not been a gentle release into quietude, but a tightening of the same cold iron shackles he'd worn for the last decade of his career. His small house on the edge of town was less a home and more a mausoleum for a single, sprawling cold case. Every surface, the coffee table, the dining chairs, the floor beside his bed, was an altar to the faces of the 5 people who had vanished into the placid, smiling facade of the community between 1990 and 1995. They weren't just files to him, they were ghosts that sat at his table, their silent judgment a constant hum beneath the floorboards. He knew their histories better than his own. The young college student who went for a jog and never returned, the newlywed couple who disappeared after a town festival, the quiet librarian, the traveling salesman. No bodies, no ransom notes, no credible witnesses. The only tangible, yet utterly useless, evidence was a collection of microcassette tapes found near the location of the final disappearance. The media had dubbed them the silent tapes, a cruel moniker for the hours of ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, that led investigators, including a younger, more hopeful Alastair, to a series of frustrating dead ends. He would often sit for hours in his worn armchair, the weak afternoon light filtering through the grimy windowpane, and simply hold one of the evidence bags containing a tape. He didn't need to play it. He had memorized the cadence of its nothingness, the specific hiss of the magnetic strip, the hollow clicks of the spools. The town of Willow Creek had long since healed, or at least had grown a thick, impenetrable scar over its trauma. New families moved in, businesses changed hands, and the story became a local legend whispered to frightened teenagers. But for Alastair, the wound remained septic. He saw the town not for its manicured lawns and quaint town square, but as a labyrinth of secrets. Each street corner a potential crime scene. Every smiling old-timer a possible keeper of a dark truth. His obsession had cost him his marriage and estranged him from his children, who saw a man choosing to live with the dead rather than the living. He traced the faded maps of search grids with a trembling finger, his mind replaying every failed interview, every dismissed lead. He remembered the hollow look in the eyes of the families, a reflection of his own growing despair. The case had broken him, not with a single dramatic snap, but through a slow, grinding erosion of his spirit, leaving him a husk animated only by the faint, desperate hope that somewhere in the static, in the silence, he had missed something. He'd spend nights poring over the minutiae, the atmospheric pressure on the day the salesman vanished, the migratory patterns of birds that might have been in the area, the geological surveys of the surrounding forests. It was a form of madness, a meticulous cataloging of a void, but it was all he had left. The weight of it was a physical presence, a stoop in his shoulders, a permanent furrow etched between his silver brows. He was the town's forgotten sentinel, the lone guardian of a silence that screamed louder to him than any confession. The world had moved on, but Alastair Finch remained, a man perpetually stuck in the last place hope was seen alive, listening intently to the sound of nothing. The change began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a new piece of technology. Alastair's grandnephew, a software engineer with more patience than Alastair deserved, had sent him an advanced audio forensics program for his birthday. It was a gesture of pity, Alastair knew, a modern toy for the old man lost in his analog past. For weeks, the software sat unopened on his desktop, an icon of digital promise he felt too weary to embrace. The old tapes were his penance, their analog hiss a familiar flagellation. But one rain-swept Tuesday, with the ghosts of the lost whispering more insistently than usual, a flicker of the old detective's tenacity sparked within him. With a sigh that seemed to carry 30 years of frustration, he began the laborious process of digitizing the silent tapes. Hours bled into days. He watched the waveforms scroll across his monitor, flat and unremarkable lines of digital silence. He listened through high-fidelity headphones, the familiar sound of wind and distant, unidentifiable rumbles now cleaner, sharper, but no more revealing. He was about to surrender, to relegate the new software to the digital graveyard of his other failed hopes, when he decided to try one of the program's more esoteric filters. It was an algorithm designed to isolate and amplify non-biological, patterned acoustic signatures from dense ambient noise. He applied it to the tape found near where the librarian, Eleanor Vance, had disappeared. He set the parameters, leaned back, and let the program run, the progress bar crawling across the screen with agonizing slowness. He expected nothing. He got everything. From the dense fog of static, a sound emerged. It was faint, almost subliminal, but it was there. A delicate, metallic, three-note chime, repeating every 15 minutes. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't an insect. It was mechanical. It was precise. A cold dread, mingled with a terrifying surge of adrenaline, washed over Alistair. He scrambled for his old case files, his hands no longer trembling with age but with purpose. He cross-referenced the location where the tape was found with his old, hand-drawn maps. It was a secluded hiking trail bordering the vast estate of the Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society. And its chairman then and now was Julian Croft. Croft, the town's impeccably dressed, charismatic historian. A man who had been a pillar of support during the investigation, always ready with a comforting word, a detailed town map, or an anecdote about local history. Alistair's mind raced, connecting dots that had been invisible for decades. He pulled up his notes from his interview with Croft in 1994. Croft had an alibi, of course. He was at his workshop, he'd said, restoring an antique. What kind of antique? Alistair frantically searched online archives, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found it in a 1993 article from the local paper, a feature on Croft's celebrated work. The photo showed Julian Croft standing proudly next to his masterpiece, a rare, 18th-century Black Forest cuckoo clock, famous for its unique, three-note chime that sounded every quarter hour. The clock was his prized possession. The sound on the tape wasn't just a chime, it was a signature. It was a timestamp and a location marker, a ghost in the machine that had waited 30 years to speak. The silence had been broken. The confrontation took place not in a sterile interrogation room, but in the heart of Julian Croft's domain, his personal study. The room was a monument to curated history, smelling of lemon oil and old paper, a stark contrast to Alistair's chaotic den of obsession. Grandfather clocks stood like silent sentinels along the walls, their pendulums still, their faces polished to a high gleam. Julian, now in his 70s but as dapper and controlled as ever, greeted Alistair with a practiced, charming smile, offering him tea. He thought it was a social call, a lonely old detective seeking the comfort of a familiar face. Alistair declined the tea. He stood in the center of the room, his posture no longer stooped with the weight of failure, but straightened by the cold, hard certainty of truth. He didn't speak at first, letting the heavy silence, so different from the silence on the tapes, stretch between them. He watched Julian's smile falter, the first crack in the porcelain facade. The historian's eyes, usually a warm, intelligent blue, flickered with a nascent unease. Alistair finally spoke, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. He didn't accuse. He simply recounted the story of the new software, of the digitized tapes, of the long, patient search for a sound within the silence. He spoke of a unique, three-note chime. As he described it, he saw a muscle twitch in Julian's jaw. The charm evaporated, replaced by a chilling stillness. Julian scoffed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. He called it a fantasy, the ramblings of an old man who couldn't let go. That's when Alistair pulled a small digital audio player from his pocket. He didn't need to have alerted the local police department beforehand. His gut told him this was the final move. He pressed play. The delicate, metallic, three-note chime filled the study. It was clean, isolated, and utterly damning. It echoed off the polished wood and glass cases. A sound completely alien to the room's curated silence, yet horrifyingly familiar to its owner. Julian Croft's composure shattered. The mask of the benevolent historian fell away to reveal the cold, possessive predator beneath. His face contorted in a mask of fury and disbelief, not at being caught, but at the imperfection of his crime, at the single, minuscule detail he had overlooked. As the chime played on a loop, the front door of the house burst open. The waiting police officers moved in, their presence a sudden, harsh intrusion of consequence into Croft's timeless sanctuary. The subsequent investigation, guided by Alistair's discovery, uncovered the victim's remains, buried on the vast, wooded grounds of the Preservation Society. Each location a place Croft had been restoring to its natural state. The town was rocked by the revelation, but for the families, it was a final, painful closure. Alistair's happy ending was not one of celebration. Weeks later, he stood by the Willow Creek River, the late afternoon sun warm on his face. He opened his worn leather-bound notebook, the one that had been his constant companion for 30 years, filled with names, dates, and dead-end theories. He looked at the pages for a long moment. Then, with a quiet, steady hand, he tore them out, one by one, and let the river carry them away. The weight in his soul, the constant hum of failure, was gone. The silence that remained was no longer an absence, but a presence. It was peace,